The first light of this age fell like liquid gold across rolling plains and glass-like rivers, painting cities in a brilliance that seemed eternal. Towers of stone and marble rose as if sculpted by the hands of gods, their spires catching the morning sun in a shimmer that made even the most hardened hearts pause. In marketplaces, merchants from distant lands traded not only goods but stories, secrets, and spices that carried the scent of faraway oceans. Children ran along aqueducts, their laughter ringing like bells, while scholars in shaded courtyards debated the nature of the stars, convinced that understanding the heavens would make them immortal. In these streets, one could feel the pulse of human ambition, a rhythm so intoxicating it seemed the world itself danced to it. No corner of this civilization escaped its own grandeur. Even the smallest villages carried the imprint of a society that believed it could bend time and memory to its will. Every craft, every invention, was an echo of a culture intoxicated by its own brilliance. The metalworkers forged bronze and iron with a precision that rivaled nature itself, turning raw ore into swords that gleamed like sunlight and tools that could carve the earth with elegance. Architects drew inspiration from the stars, aligning temples and palaces with celestial movements, creating spaces where the sacred and the earthly intertwined seamlessly. Musicians tuned their instruments to the rhythms of the wind and river, filling halls and courtyards with melodies that spoke of triumph, love, and the fleeting nature of human life. Even the simplest acts, baking bread, weaving cloth, tending gardens, were elevated to art, practiced with a devotion of ritual. In these moments, the age revealed its greatest secret. It was not merely survival that drove its people, but the relentless pursuit of beauty, knowledge, and legacy, as if each life were a verse in an epic yet unwritten. Yet beneath the glimmer of prosperity, subtle shadows began to stir. The courts of kings and councils of scholars, while resplendent in gold and silk, often whispered with discontent. Ambition, which had once fueled creation, now flirted with obsession. Rivalries formed between states, each striving not only for land or wealth but for dominance of culture itself. Artists and poets were courted by power, their words twisted to glorify one ruler or diminish another. And while the common people marveled at fountains that poured wine, libraries that held maps of the known and unknown, and theaters that brought myths to life, few noticed that the machinery of empire, its trade routes, armies, and taxation grew heavier with each passing season, like a stone silently pressing down on a fragile bloom. This was a world on the cusp of brilliance and peril, where every gleaming monument hinted at the fragility hidden within its foundation. In the countryside, life moved to a rhythm both eternal and fleeting. Farmers tended fields with the same devotion as artisans, their hands carving sustenance from the soil as others carved marble into wonder. Shepherds guided flocks along sunlit hills, their songs blending with the wind, creating an unbroken melody of existence. Villagers celebrated harvests with dances that mirrored the movements of the cosmos, unaware that their laughter, their joy, was part of the tapestry of history itself. Even nature seemed to respond. To human ingenuity, canals turned rivers to gold at sunset. Orchards bent under the weight of fruit, as if honoring the toil that had nurtured them. And yet, the same wind that carried the fragrance of blossoms also carried the seeds of change, subtle and persistent, waiting for the moment when harmony would fracture into discord. The intellectual spirit of the era shone as brightly as its monuments. Philosophers debated the essence of life and death under the shade of olive trees, their voices carrying across marble courtyards, challenging the boundaries of thought. Astronomers charted the skies with instruments that seemed to whisper the secrets of infinity, calculating the motions of planets with an accuracy that would astound later generations. Inventors sketched machines that promised to ease labor and expand horizons, from water-lifting devices to early contraptions for flight, each drawing closer to the impossible. Libraries overflowed with scrolls, meticulously copied by scribes whose hands seemed guided by divine precision. Knowledge was both a shield and a crown, offering power to those who could wield it wisely. And in this age of radiant intellect, Humanity believed it could touch the stars, map the soul, and shape destiny itself. Festivals punctuated the rhythm of life, and in these moments, the world seemed suspended in a dream of its own making. Streets glowed with lanterns, theaters echoed with songs and laughter, and arenas roared with the feats of athletes whose bodies moved like poetry in motion. Every citizen, from noble to servant, participated in rituals that celebrated triumph, love, and survival. Musicians, acrobats, and dancers performed not for mere entertainment, but as offerings to the gods and ancestors, binding the living to the legacy of the past. In these celebrations, the brilliance of the age revealed its heart, a belief in joy as sacred, in beauty as necessary, and in the fleeting life of mortals as worthy of grandeur. It was a world that wore its magnificence openly, as if daring the universe to find fault in its brilliance. And yet, for all its splendor, a quiet undercurrent whispered of impermanence. The empires, no matter how vast, were built on human hands, prone to error and desire. Wealth and power, while dazzling, attracted envy and ambition, tensions that would one day strain the foundations of even the most steadfast cities. The same fountains that poured wine would one day run dry. The same theaters would fall silent. In every smile, in every triumph, there existed a shadow of fragility, a reminder that light, no matter how radiant, bends and fades. The dawn of this golden age shone with hope and splendor, yet in that very brilliance lay the seeds of its own undoing, a truth that history would reveal when the sun began its slow descent. Palaces rose like mountains of stone and flame, each one a testament to ambition and excess. Their walls, carved with intricate reliefs of gods and heroes, held the echoes of laughter, whispers, and plots. Golden chandeliers reflected the sunlight by day and candlelight by night, casting dancing shadows across tapestries that depicted victories of old kings and queens. Within these halls, rulers adorned in silk and jewels deliberated not only on the fate of their kingdoms, but on the legacies they would leave behind. Every decision, whether of war, trade, or marriage, was both a strategy and a performance, a careful choreography of power meant to impress allies and intimidate rivals. Yet beneath the gilded surface, ambition festered like fire beneath dry wood, and even the most loyal ministers carried the weight of envy and desire. The court was a stage where appearances were as vital as action. Diplomats arrived with gifts and flattery, hoping to secure alliances or favor. Spies observed from shadowed corners, collecting secrets like currency, and scholars offered wisdom that might tilt the balance of decisions, their scrolls and calculations cloaked in subtle persuasion. Kings drank wine that sparkled like liquid rubies and listened to minstrels sing of their ancestors' glory. Yet no amount of celebration could mask the tension in the air. Rivalries, once dormant, now simmered openly. Brothers competed for crowns, generals for glory, and courtiers for influence, each maneuvering to claim a piece of the golden world. Every smile, every bow, every carefully spoken word carried weight, sometimes enough to decide life or death. Power demanded spectacle. Parades through cobblestone streets showcased armies in perfect formation, banners fluttering like flames against the sky. Citizens watched with awe, their hearts swelling with pride, unaware of the strain beneath the polished uniforms and gleaming armor. Forges labored day and night, producing weapons not just for protection but for domination, each sword and spear a tool of ambition. Artisans labored under the gaze of their patrons, creating statues, mosaics, and jewelry meant to immortalize the ruling elite. Every stone, every brushstroke, every note of music reinforced a single truth, that these rulers would be remembered for eternity. And yet, for all the brilliance, there lingered an invisible tremor, the faint warning that all fire, no matter how bright, consumes what nourishes it. Behind closed doors, darker currents ran deep, Advisors whispered of threats real and imagined. Generals plotted coups cloaked as counsel. Siblings schemed in silence, each move calculated to secure dominance. Alliances were fragile, and loyalty was often a mask for self-interest. In the opulent banquet halls, where laughter echoed over overflowing goblets, hidden knives glinted beneath tables, and the eyes of the ambitious darted like hawks. Wealth, while a shield, also acted as a magnet for treachery, drawing those who craved power and testing the bonds of kinship and friendship alike. Even the most secure thrones bore the strain of human desire, proving that golden walls could not contain ambition, and that the higher one climbed, the farther one could fall. Outside the palace walls, the citizens basked in the reflected glow of their ruler's grandeur. Markets thrived under the shadow of monumental architecture. Festivals celebrated victories, both real and symbolic, and the arts flourished, nourished by the patronage of those who wished to be immortal in memory. Musicians and poets wove tales that glorified kings and queens, yet often, in subtle undertones, revealed cracks in the splendor, rumors of cruelty, whispers of excess, or hints of mismanagement. In their joy, the people unknowingly bore witness to the delicate dance of power, a spectacle in which brilliance and vulnerability existed side by side. The brilliance of the age, while dazzling, masked a precarious balance. One misstep, one betrayal, could send the whole edifice tumbling. Even the land itself seemed to mirror the tension within human hearts. Rivers that nourished fields also flooded in fury. Forests that provided wood and game could conceal ambushes. Storms could strip away gold and grain alike. Nature, indifferent, yet omnipresent, reminded all that no palace, no throne, no army could control the world entirely. And yet, rulers ignored these warnings, intoxicated by their own reflection in polished marble and gilded mirrors. Fire and gold, symbols of ambition, power, and human brilliance, burned with unmatched intensity, but like all flames, they carried the promise of destruction. In the pursuit of immortality through power, men and women of this golden age edged ever closer to a precipice they could neither see nor resist. By the end of these years, a subtle decay had begun to infiltrate even the most radiant courts. Wealth bred arrogance, and admiration became entitlement. Generosity turned into manipulation, wisdom into obsession, and celebration into distraction from the fractures forming beneath the gilded surface. The empire stood on pillars of fire and gold, dazzling to behold, yet dangerously unstable. What the world did not yet realize was that brilliance alone could not endure, and that the very splendor that inspired awe and loyalty also carried the seed of ruin. The thrones glimmered, the crowns sparkled, and the people danced, yet the first shadows of decline had already crept through the golden corridors. At first, the unrest was subtle, a barely perceptible shift in the rhythm of life. Farmers whispered of poor harvests that defied explanation, while merchants noted that trade caravans returned lighter than expected, carrying less than they had promised. The air, once filled with music and laughter, now carried murmurs of dissatisfaction. Even in the grand cities, the streets hummed with unease. Servants exchanged knowing glances, soldiers tightened their grips on spears, and craftsmen whispered of unpaid debts. It was as if the world itself sensed the first fractures beneath the golden veneer, and the heavens mirrored that unease in clouds that seemed heavier, winds that carried an edge, and skies that refused to remain calm. Religious and spiritual tensions began to weave into daily life. Temples, once centers of guidance and devotion, became stages for debate and rivalry. Priests and oracles, interpreting signs in flames and stars, warned of omens. Yet rulers often ignored them, convinced that wealth and power could outrun fate. The common people felt the tension in their bones, a restlessness that made songs sound hollow and festivals less joyful. Ancient rituals, once performed to honor the cycles of life, became appeals for mercy pleas to preserve what had been taken for granted. Faith, once a unifying force, now carried the weight of expectation, fear, and the growing realization that even the gods might not intervene on humanity's behalf. Rebellion stirred quietly at first. Villages withheld taxes, artisans demanded fair compensation, and soldiers, long loyal, began to question orders that served ambition over justice. Whispered alliances formed in the shadow of forests and hills, and secret letters exchanged promises of support, defiance, and change. Small skirmishes erupted along borders once considered secure, testing both loyalty and military might. Leaders, intoxicated by their own brilliance, dismissed these early signs as minor annoyances, yet the cracks were widening like the first faint lines on a mirror destined to shatter. The Golden Age's reflection of perfection was slowly distorting, revealing fractures that no wealth or power could conceal. Political intrigue intensified, consuming courts from within. Siblings plotted against each other, generals conspired to replace kings, and ministers manipulated decrees for personal gain. Diplomatic relationships, once carefully maintained, began to strain under hidden agendas and veiled threats. Ambassadors returned with messages of unease, and the air inside grand halls thickened with suspicion. Every gesture, every compliment, every bow became a potential trap, a subtle assertion of dominance. The facade of unity crumbled under the weight of ambition, and the once gleaming courts began to feel like gilded cages, where beauty and danger intertwined inseparably. Meanwhile, the natural world mirrored humanity's unrest. Rivers flooded beyond their bounds, leaving crops and homes submerged. Forests roared with storms that toppled centuries-old trees, and animals, once predictable, moved erratically, heralding disruption in the fragile balance of life. People interpreted these signs with fear and superstition, believing that the gods themselves had withdrawn favor. Scholars and astrologers debated endlessly, attempting to rationalize the chaos, but even their calculations failed to capture the growing instability. Nature's reminders were relentless. No empire, no palace, no throne could truly resist the forces that moved beyond human control. The cracks in heaven's mirror were no longer subtle, they were impossible to ignore. Social tensions intertwined with these omens, creating an atmosphere charged with uncertainty. The poor, long overlooked, grew restless and daring. The middle classes sought security amidst growing instability. And even the elite could not ignore the whispers of discontent that passed through their halls. Communities that had once celebrated life now eyed each other with suspicion, and loyalty became conditional, measured in favors, promises, or fear. The Golden Age, for all its grandeur, faced a profound reckoning. The brilliance that had once inspired awe could now not shield its people from the consequences of imbalance. Harmony and chaos existed side by side, and the mirror of human civilization reflected both, revealing the first true glimpses of an inevitable fall. By the close of this era, tension had become tangible, almost visible, a taut cord stretched across every palace, street, and field. What had begun as subtle misalignment now demanded attention. The gods, the winds, the rivers, and the people themselves seemed to conspire, reminding all that perfection was fragile, and that the more radiant the age, the sharper the fractures beneath. The cracks in heaven's mirror, once small and ignorable, now threatened to splinter the world entirely, heralding a collapse that would reshape the landscape of civilization and force even the most powerful to reckon with the impermanence of their golden dreams. The glow of the Golden Age began to fade not in a single moment, but in a slow, relentless suffusion of shadows. Palaces that had once dazzled with sunlight and candlelight now felt heavy, their corridors echoing with the absence of laughter and trust. Markets that had thrived with vibrant trade became quiet, the hum of merchants replaced by murmurs of scarcity and fear. Even the rivers, which once gleamed like molten silver, reflected skies streaked with smoke from distant fires. Civilization, in all its brilliance, was now illuminated by the flickering, uneven light of decline, a light that revealed both beauty and decay with cruel clarity. Wars, once thought distant or symbolic, erupted across borders and within city walls. Armies that had paraded in triumph now clashed in desperation, their weapons wielded with both skill and anger born from necessity. Citizens who had cheered on festivals found themselves conscripted into conflicts that were not their own. Their homes and fields caught in the crossfire. Siege engines roared like beasts, and the cries of the wounded carried over battlements and through valleys. The fire of human ambition, which had once built towers and spurred invention, now consumed them. What had been created with care and hope began to crumble under its own weight, a reminder that brilliance without balance is fragile. Leadership, once a beacon of stability, faltered under the pressures of unrest and betrayal. Kings and queens, once envied for their command, now faced conspiracies in every chamber, decisions haunted by doubt and fear. Ministers manipulated events from behind tapestries and stone walls, seeking advantage while presenting loyalty. Courts became labyrinths of suspicion, where even allies were suspect, and trust became a currency rarer than gold. The ambition that had inspired creation now fueled destruction, proving that the same force that lifts civilization can also unmake it. Within these walls of fire and gold, the seeds of ruin blossomed openly, nourished by greed, fear, and pride. The people, once buoyed by hope and innovation, began to bear the weight of loss. Harvests failed in patterns they could not predict, and famine crept silently into villages and cities alike. Disease, once rare and contained, spread quickly through populations weakened by hunger and stress. Families mourned children taken too early. Communities watched as entire trades disappeared under the strain of instability. Even culture, the music, the poetry, the celebrations that had defined the era grew muted, a shadowed echo of former brilliance. In every street and field, the shimmer of the golden age dulled, leaving behind a haunting reminder of impermanence. Temples and places of worship, once bustling with devotion and ceremony, now echoed with pleas and despair. Priests warned that the gods had turned their gaze, and citizens feared that celestial balance had shifted irrevocably. Rituals became desperate attempts to reclaim fortune, to slow the descent of calamity. Yet no incantation, no offering, no human ingenuity could hold back the tide. Even faith, a pillar once thought eternal, trembled in the face of widespread suffering. The light that had illuminated civilization was dimming, and the world felt smaller, colder, and infinitely more precarious than it had ever been. Amid the chaos, brilliant minds struggled to preserve knowledge and order. Scholars documented events, artists captured the fading splendor, and philosophers pondered the reasons for decline. Yet these efforts, though noble, could not arrest the sweeping momentum of entropy. Societies fractured, alliances broke, and empires shrank. Cities that had thrived on innovation and commerce now struggled to maintain walls and trade routes. And as smoke rose from burned villages and crowns became symbols of fleeting authority, one truth became undeniable. No light, no matter how radiant, can last forever when ambition blinds reason and greed corrupts vision. The age of brilliance had begun its descent, and the world would never be the same. When the fires of ambition and greed finally waned, silence descended upon the lands once ablaze with splendor. The cities, though still standing, bore the scars of human desire unchecked. Collapsed towers, shattered statues, and streets littered with the remnants of a civilization that had believed itself eternal. Rivers, once the veins of trade and life, now carried debris and sorrow. Fields lay fallow, and forests, though resilient, whispered with the memories of villages long abandoned. The brilliance of the Golden Age had left behind echoes faint, haunting, and persistent reminders that greatness can flourish only as long as balance endures. Survivors wandered through remnants of their past lives, carrying knowledge, skill, and stories like fragile treasures. Families rebuilt modest homes where palaces once soared. Artisans crafted with simple tools instead of golden instruments, and scholars preserved texts, maps, and scrolls in hidden alcoves, safeguarding wisdom for generations that might come. Memory became both a shield and a compass, a guide for those who would inherit a world stripped of certainty but rich with lessons. Even in loss, the human spirit endured, seeking light in shadow, continuity in disruption, and meaning in the ruins of what once seemed permanent. The echoes of faith and culture lingered, haunting every stone and grove. Temples stood empty yet resonated with chants long silenced, their walls telling stories of devotion, triumph, and despair. Music that had celebrated prosperity became elegy, sung softly by those who remembered the dances of old. Festivals transformed into remembrance, gatherings where survival, not splendor, was celebrated. Art and architecture, though fractured and weathered, remain testaments to imagination, unbound by time. In these echoes, humanity discovered resilience, a capacity to carry forward beauty, wisdom, and hope, even when the structures that housed them crumbled. Political power, once the axis of society, became ephemeral. Crowns were abandoned, thrones reclaimed by dust, and empires dissolved into memory. Those who had sought dominion learned that control is temporary, that influence fades with time, and that no conquest can outrun mortality. Leaders became legends, sometimes glorified, sometimes lamented, but ultimately subject to the same fragility that defined their people. In the quiet aftermath, authority existed not in spectacle or opulence, but in guidance, stewardship, and the careful preservation of knowledge. From these ashes, the seeds of new civilizations were sown, quietly, patiently, without grandeur, but with enduring purpose. Nature, resilient and indifferent, reclaimed what humanity had once held. Forests spread into abandoned fields, rivers cut new channels, and animals roamed freely where armies had marched. The cycle of life, ever patient, reminded survivors that the world itself endures beyond ambition and folly. Human memory, however, continued to honor what was lost. Stories passed through generations, ruins explored for lessons, and histories chronicled to illuminate both triumph and caution. These echoes formed the bridge between past and future, ensuring that while empires may fall, wisdom endures, and the heartbeat of civilization continues, even in silence. In this final reckoning, the world learned to measure brilliance against humility, ambition against restraint, and pride against foresight. The Golden Age had been radiant, intoxicating, and magnificent. Yet its demise was not sudden. It was a slow, inexorable unraveling, a reminder of the delicate balance between creation and destruction. And in that awareness, humanity found a quiet kind of immortality, the knowledge that even when civilizations fall, their echoes resonate through time, shaping the hearts, minds, and dreams of those yet to come. Because the past is never truly gone, it's waiting to be reborn.